So that you're not wondering the whole time I'm preaching who I am, I'll tell you. My name is Father Broussard, and I'm the Vocation Director for the Diocese of Lafayette. And I don't usually like to admit this, but I'm pretty good friends with Father Bordelon. But don't tell too many people that. But it's great to be with you this morning for this Mass, especially when we're honoring our veterans. Right, we thank you for your service, present, past, and we're inspired by it. Right, we honor today those people who've dedicated either their entire life or part of their life to service of our country, right, to protect us. That certainly cost them a great deal. I'm listening to an audiobook about George Washington right now, and over again the author speaks about how trying his time in the military was, not only on himself, but on his wife and on his family. It's a great sacrifice of those who dedicate themselves to service of others, and so we're very thankful, and we rightly honor you today. We're also celebrating something else in the church today. We're celebrating another dedication, a dedication of the Basilica of St. John Lateran. Basilica of St. John Lateran, the original church dates to the 300s, 4th century, and it's in Rome. It's the cathedral of the city of Rome. Just as we have the cathedral in Lafayette, the place where the bishop has his official church, the Cathedral of Rome is the official church of the Pope. That's where his seat of power is. And on that church, there's a plaque outside that reads that it's the mother and head of all churches in Rome and in the world. That is the mother church of our Catholic faith. So it's a great place of pilgrimage, a great place to go and to pray and to feel united to our worldwide Catholic faith, our universal faith. And it may seem strange to celebrate this feast of a dedication of a building. But we're not celebrating so much the building as its dedication. Right? That word is important. The dedication of the Basilica of St. John Lateran. Right? It is dedicated for a specific purpose. That building is set aside as a place where we go to worship God. A place set aside, a place of privilege where God comes into contact with man and man comes into contact with God. Right? Just like any church is dedicated to worshiping God. Right? When we come into this building, we act differently than when we walk into school, huh? When we walk into school and we see a friend, we'll raise our hand and maybe even say something, right? Hey, how you doing? But not when we come here, right? Maybe we give a little head nod to acknowledge their presence, but we don't speak loudly in here. Right? It's reserved for dedication, for worship of God. And so we act differently because God is present here. Right? Spiritually, but also present in the Eucharist. Right? Present really in that great sacrament. And finally, the third dedication that I want to speak about is the dedication that we see in this week that we're celebrating. This week we celebrate National Vocations Awareness Week. And so whenever I knew that, I called Father Bordelon. I said, hey, can I come celebrate the school Mass this week? Talk about vocations? And he didn't want to let it go, but finally he let me. Right? He let me come and speak to you. And I think that this gospel today is very fitting. Right? This gospel where Jesus goes in and he cleanses the temple. Right? The temple, again, this place that had been dedicated to the worship of God, was being used for things not of God. Right? Selling and buying animals. And so he wanted to remind them of the fact that that place had been dedicated for God, but it also calls to mind the reality that we're temples of God. That when we were baptized, right, we were dedicated to the service of God. We were dedicated to worshiping Him. We were dedicated to praying to Him. We were dedicated to living for Him. and that we are reminded to live that out. And so we should ask ourselves, right, are we keeping our temple, right, our body, as a place of worship for God? Or are we using it for other things? Right? Sin is using our bodies, our lives, for things other than the things of God. And so we should think about if we're doing that. Are we using our temple for the correct purpose, right? Adoring Him, worshiping Him with everything that we say and we do and we think. Would people look at us and say, that Father Broussard, he loves God? Or would they say, I'm not sure how that guy's a priest. I don't know what he's doing, but he needs to get his act together. What would they say about us? And so during this Vocations Awareness Week, we should be reminded that we were dedicated to serve God, to ask ourselves if we're doing that by becoming holy, by trying to strive to love God, and to ask how He's calling us to dedicate ourselves to Him. Right? Are we called to marriage and dedicating ourselves to God through loving a husband or a wife, through loving and supporting our children and guiding them to holiness? Or are we called to the priesthood? Right, to love God, to spread His word in that very particular way by offering Him service in His church, or to the religious life or consecrated life. It's not too early to start praying about that. You can't make a decision yet, you can't follow it yet, but it's not too early to pray about it, to ask God to show you how He wants you to serve Him in this life. And so as a church community, we recommit ourselves today to living a dedicated life. Right? A life dedicated to service of God and others. A life dedicated to service of the church. And we ask Him, through this Mass that we celebrate, to give us the grace, the strength that we need to remain dedicated to Him in everything that we do.